What's going on, San Antonio Spurs fans? Today we're here for the fourth part of the Southwest Division Preview Series. We're going to be talking about the Rockets with a very special guest. We've got senior writer at the Dream Shake, Jeremy Brener. How you doing, Jeremy?
I'm good, Noah. Every day this offseason has been a roller coaster in itself. So even though it's been the shortest offseason in NBA history, it kind of feels like the longest one for us here in Houston.
Yeah, it's been wild. There's been so much news about Houston, surrounding Houston, especially with James Harden, and we'll get into that in like just a second. But I do want to talk to you first about the moves the Rockets made this offseason and kind of what they're telling you, at least, about where this team is headed. So we've seen them add John Wall. Of course, that was in the trade for Russell Westbrook. They got Christian Wood. They added Demarcus Cousins, Sterling Brown, Gerald Green. What do these additions tell you, and what do you think they're going to bring to the table for the Rockets this season?
The team is kind of in flux right now. We're at a position where we're good, but we're not great. And we need to decide where is best to move forward. So with the addition of guys like Christian Wood, getting a little bit younger, Sterling Brown, even, you get guys that, could be here for a little bit longer. And I know Sterling Brown's on a 1-year deal, but he adds some youth. He's only 25. So I think this is like the youngest team they've had in like 6 or 7 years. But then you bring in Demarcus Cousins, and then you bring in John Wall, and that gives you a sense of, if the Rockets want to contend this year and, go at it again, they have the ability to do that as well. So there's this sense that they can go in several different directions. They don't really know what direction they're going to take, and a lot of that has to do with the fact of, whether James is going to play, whether he's going to be all in, whether he's not, and that kind of is where the team's at right now. The ball is kind of in James Harden's court in regards to where this team wants to go for this season. But right now, the Rockets, they probably are envisioning Harden staying for the year unless they get some offer they simply can't refuse.
Sure, man. I mean, that makes sense. The Spurs were in a similar situation with Kawhi Leonard a few years ago where, clearly he wanted to move on from the team. There were still years left on his contract. So at that point, you're kind of at the liberty of your superstar. The value kind of tanks for them, not because they're not valuable, but because teams know that you're kind of desperate, that you're going to have to figure something out. So I'm interested to see how that plays out for the Rockets. Now I want to talk a little bit about John Wall and Demarcus Cousins. So John Wall hasn't played in 2 years now. And Demarcus Cousins is a guy who is sort of an injury concern. We're not really sure how long he's going to play, how much he's going to be able to play. What kind of role do you see them having on this team? And do you think they're going to be able to impact winning, or are they going to be someone who are kind of lower roles than one might expect?
If we were in the year 2017, the Rockets would be considered title favorites at this point, given just looking at the roster.
Yeah.
But it is 2020, and John Wall hasn't played in 2 years. And look, if you put Demarcus Cousins and John Wall's legs together, they form one good pair of Achilles. So, I mean, there's that, but I mean, that's all. It's good on paper, and we are uncertain of what it looks like on the court. And right now, with just 2 weeks before the season, you're gonna get all this news of, they look great, and they look better than before. Like John Wall had that Chris Mannix article on SI, and it was like, John Wall's faster than ever. And look, you would like to think that's true, but I want to see it in a game and show me on the court. Like I said on my I said on a recent podcast of mine, the off season is for speculation, and the real season is when the facts come out, the numbers come out. You see how good teams are based on their record and based on how they play on the court. And that's what really matters at the end of the day, not what we're seeing here in the offseason. But look, if John Wall can be what he needs to be is he needs to be someone that can bring the ball up court, give James Harden a little bit of, rest, and not necessarily rest in terms of, him playing and James sitting on the bench, but just not so that he doesn't get gassed at end of games. That's what Demarcus Cousins said in a presser a couple days ago, is that's what John Wall's there for. And to be a nice, sidekick. And, Russell Westbrook was that for him last year, but the two of them were too similar. I feel like John Wall is a little bit more of a complementary piece to James Harden. So I like that fit better, maybe a little bit than Russ and James. I feel like Russ and James, their games kind of overlapped, and they both kind of did the same thing. And ultimately forced the Rockets to play one style of play, which was small ball. And it was good while it was, until the Lakers figured it out. And that was the end of the Rockets there, because they had no other way of playing. Steven Silas this year, he wants to play. And I love the Steven Silas hire. He's out of the 5 coaches that I've had since I've followed the Rockets when I was 6 years old. He's my absolute favorite one, and he hasn't even coached a game yet. I love everything that he said, and I think he's handling the Harden situation very well. And he wants to play very different than what D'Antoni did. Wants to play a little more unpredictable, play with bigs, play without bigs, space the floor, pick and roll, pick and pop. That's what James Harden's good at. And that's why I really hope James buys in, because if he does, this might be one of the better teams that he's had in Houston.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. I really like Steven Silas as from what I've heard from him so far. It looks like he's kind of treading a little carefully with the James Harden situation, which is totally fair. That's definitely something you kind of have to do, especially with a disgruntled superstar. But it seems like what you're saying is that they're going to change up the play style a little bit this year. And I think that's good for them, because I think it has become a little bit predictable. We've seen them really have a lot of regular season success, but then when it comes to the playoff, teams are able to really attack their weaknesses and kind of figure them out. So I'm excited to see what they can do. And in terms of John Wall, I think you're absolutely right. I think he complements him a little bit better. And he's obviously not the same kind of player as Chris Paul. Like Chris Paul is a little bit better defender, at least in my opinion. He's a better shooter. But I think John Wall is a significantly better decision maker than Russell Westbrook is. And I think if he can continue to kind of distribute the ball in a similar way, but make less mistakes and take better shots. Like I think he also has just a better shot selection than Russell Westbrook did at times. And I know Westbrook gets knocked a lot. I like him, but I think John Wall could be really good complementary piece here if he's healthy. And if he comes out, and you're right, like we're going to have to see if that's the case. Is he faster than ever? Probably not, but we're just going to have to wait for the regular season to see how that pans out. And now I'd kind of like to ask you, so the draft, not really a lot happened for the Rockets in the draft. Yeah. I know they traded, I think, for Kenyon Martin Jr. What did you think about that? And we don't have to go too deep into this because it's not really that significant of a move, but I didn't see him, or, I spent a lot of time scouting the class and I didn't have him top 60 or even top 70 on my board. So I thought it was kind of a curious decision. What did you think? Is it just to inject some youth into the roster? Because I don't think he's a guy who has a lot of upside, and I don't think he's a guy who's an NBA player at this point in his career.
Yeah, well, that's also the benefit about it, Noah, is that he is someone that they can work on, and he doesn't. And given the Rockets' current situation, he doesn't have to play right now. And look, Daryl Morey's whole MO was that first round picks are not where the value is. It's in the second round. And if you look at Daryl Morey's track record in the second round, it's actually been pretty good. You look at you look at guys like DeAnthony Melton, who got a second contract with the Grizzlies. Chandler Parsons, he drafted in the second round, made a boatload of money in the NBA. So he has success in the second round. Montrezl Harrell, another second round Rockets pick made by Morey. So he prefers guys in the second round. And, you look at guys that just, you want to just find something. And I feel like the Rockets made that move simply because they know that KJ Martin is a project, but they have potential there. And what's good about KJ Martin is that he can play multiple positions. He can play the 3, he can play the 4, and even when they put in a small lineup, he can maybe even play the 5. And he also has a good corner 3. What I noticed, there was a clip on Twitter that was trending when the draft was coming about, and he hit like 50 corner 3s in 70 attempts. So that's a perfect guy for a team like the Rockets that loves to space the ball out, shoot a lot of 3s. And to be honest, I mean, look, KJ Martin's not going to be a huge factor this year, probably not even next year, but he's just someone that maybe down the road could be that diamond in the rough that they find and say, hey, plug him in and maybe he'll be that guy for us.
Sure. And like I said, I mean, I wasn't very high on him. I don't think he has a ton of upside. I think there were players who, especially given the Rockets' circumstances, that they could have targeted guys who were able to play from day one. There was a really deep draft class, as weak as it was at the very top in terms of the talent. It's a very deep draft class. There's a lot of guys who probably could plug and play. But I think, again, it's a second round pick. At the end of the day, that's not going to be consequential. For almost any team, it's not going to be consequential. So if it works out, great. Clearly, you like him a lot, and he seems like he may have some utility. Like you said, he can play a few different positions. Corner three is incredibly important in the NBA today. So I'm excited to
Honestly,
see
though,
how he goes.
if I had to tell you, if I had to tell you something else, the guy that they signed right after the draft, Mason Jones, they put him on a
Yeah.
2-way contract. I like his chances, and it wouldn't surprise me if he even plays this season. I think he is a little bit more NBA ready than KJ Martin. Mason Jones, 22, played in the SEC. He was a leading scorer in the SEC last season, and he's he kind of styles his game behind James Harden. And another thing about that too, James Harden was working out with Mason Jones right after he signed. So that's another sign that points to Harden and his commitment level with the Rockets. I assume that it's better than zero, simply leading to that. But Mason Jones is a guy that can be a backup point guard, especially considering the fact that that position is probably the weakest in terms of depth. You have Jerian Grant and Chris Clemens, both of whom do not have fully guaranteed deals. And the way that 2-way contracts work this season, with it being 50 games in which they can be active out of a 72-game season, that makes me think that Mason Jones has a chance to crack some rotation minutes, especially considering, Wall's health, Harden's up in the air, and just where the point guard position is at the roster. And I think a guy like Steven Silas is not going to be afraid to play a guy like that. They've had some success in Dallas by playing guys like Jalen Brunson, was a late pick, I believe. There's a chance that he could crack the rotation. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
No,
I'm much more excited about him than KJ Martin for this season.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't surprise me either. And I'm glad you brought him up because he's somebody who I really liked. I thought he was definitely worth a mid to like late second round flyer. And I was surprised that that didn't really happen for him, but I'm glad that he's on a team. And I didn't know that he had worked out with James Harden yet. I know that James Harden reported to camp, I believe, yesterday. So let's talk about him a little bit. So obviously we've been hearing a lot of rumors, whether it be he wants to go to the Nets and play with KD and Kyrie, or he's open to being traded to a contender. What do you make of those rumors, and how likely do you think it is that he's going to get moved this season?
It's funny because every time there's 6 rumors leading to one thing, there's half a dozen rumors that lead and contradict all of those rumors. So I've tried my best to kind of, sift through the rumors and sift through what's true and what's not, the information, the mission. And to be honest, it all leads back to nothing actually has really happened yet. He's still with the Rockets. The Rockets have, made their stance clear. They don't want to trade him unless they get a really good, value out of him. And I think the only teams that have really called are Brooklyn. I really don't think that any team has really gone into deep consideration. I honestly think the team that makes the most sense to trade with the Rockets is the Raptors.
Okay.
Ironically enough, the team that traded for Kawhi 2 years ago. And that's part of the reason why Toronto, Kyle Lowry's on the last year of his deal. So their championship window in itself, the East is getting a lot better.
Yeah.
The Raptors, this might be their last year of true contention with their current scheme. If they offer Siakam, I'm definitely listening, because Siakam's top 3 at his position. And that's a guy that can lead you into the next era of Rockets basketball, as a cornerstone of the franchise. Now, I don't know if the Raptors are willing to part ways with Siakam. They were willing to part ways with DeMar DeRozan, and that surprised a lot of people. So that's why I wouldn't put Toronto out of the eye. And the thing with Philly, I think Philly wants Harden, but they don't want to give up Ben Simmons. And I think Brooklyn just doesn't have the pieces for a deal like that. But Toronto, a team that is not afraid to make a move like that. And on top of that, if they trade Harden for Siakam, they'll still have a max salary spot for 2021 in which they can go after Giannis or Bradley Beal. And if they can go do that, they'll have Harden and Giannis together. That might be the next contending duo in the league that might just throw the league into circus again.
Yeah, that honestly would be pretty crazy. I haven't even thought about the Raptors as a possible destination for Harden. Like you mentioned, I kind of thought of the Sixers, but I know that they don't want to part with Ben Simmons. And
look, with Kawhi, nobody thought the Raptors were a spot for Kawhi either.
Yeah. Nobody had even Spurs fans and people who cover the Spurs, it was really like kind of, it blindsided everybody for sure. And I think that's fair to say, like, maybe they pull it off again. Because I think even if you're only able to get Harden for like 1 year and you make a run for the title and you end up winning like they did with Kawhi and then he's gone, you still have another title. And I think at the end of the day, that's what you're striving for. You're striving for titles. You're a team like Toronto, who is not a traditional free agent destination. You got to do what you can to win titles. And I wouldn't really be that surprised. Like, it would surprise me, but I wouldn't be completely blindsided if he ended up going to Toronto.
The more that I've talked about it, the more that I've thought about it, the more likely it seems. I know in my head, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's something that hasn't really come out yet. But who knows? I think honestly though, Harden is going to be in Houston for the season. And then we'll see from there. I think it's more likely he gets traded next off season. I just think timing's better. More teams are going to be more likely to give something. The Rockets won't have as much value for him, so they'll have more of a chance to trade him. So that's why I think Harden stays with the Rockets this season. They hope that they can keep Harden engaged for this season and keep him excited for what's to come. My thinking is the Rockets are going to wait for the season to play out and hope to sign him to an extension, and if they can't, they'll trade him.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw that he rejected that $50 million 2-year extension. You can read into that however you want, but I also think like players probably want the long-term deal. They're not looking for 1-2 years. That's kind of a compromising position. You get injured, not saying he will, knock on wood, but if you get injured, that's potentially your last contract ever. So I think people may be reading into him rejecting that a little bit too much. But one of the things that I'm kind of interested in discussing with you is, we've heard that some of the teammates were, I guess, rubbed the wrong way by the way the organization was kind of catering towards Harden. And we know that there's maybe a little bit of drama with Harden right now. Do you think that impacts how they play this season? Do you think that they're going to be able to stay together, working together as a cohesive unit? Or do you think we're going to see this team, maybe flounder a little bit, not meet expectations?
I think that a lot of the problems that occurred in the organization can be traced back to Mike D'Antoni. And that sounds bad. And I'm not trying to say that Mike D'Antoni was a bad coach, because he won a playoff series in every year he was here. So he deserves a lot of credit for what he did with that team. And had an injury gone a different way in 2018, we could have totally won that title and he'd probably still be the head coach. But, there was talks about Eric Gordon not being satisfied with his role. That can change with Silas, because Silas is more of a, he will establish a solid role for Eric Gordon, because Eric Gordon, since he got here, has been going from, back to the bench and in the starting lineup and back and forth his whole 4 years here. And, I can understand why he'd be frustrated with that. PJ Tucker is disappointed that he hasn't gotten a contract extension. Now, PJ Tucker has been totally the glue of the team for years now, since he got here. But also, he's going to be 36 in May, and it's hard to give a guy like that an extension, and probably someone that wants a raise too from his $8 million a year that he already makes. So that, to me, look, PJ is not going to like hold out and be immature about it. He's still going to go out and give everything he has. And look, I hope he comes back, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't after the season, just because of where he is in his career and where the Rockets are in their scheme of things. And also, Mike D'Antoni I think the reason why Mike D'Antoni and James Harden got along is because Mike D'Antoni kind of let James Harden do his thing and kind of let him drive the ship. Now, there's a good thing about that and there's a bad thing about that. The good thing about that is your best player feels like he has all this freedom on offense, and he did. And that's why his numbers were as good as they were. The bad thing, though, is that off the court, it kind of, it can kind of make people think, he's kind of entitled and all this. And that's what a lot of people have noticed since then. Chris Paul kind of called him out on it, and, Russell Westbrook kind of called him out on it. But Stephen Silas is not going to be that kind of coach that just lets James Harden do what he wants. He's going to be a guy that I think, like, Stephen Silas is more methodical, I'd say, in what he does. Like, it's not going to be like a free range offense. There's going to be an actual system, and there's going to be ways on how to do things. It's not going to be just, free motion, do whatever you'd like. and you call it. It gives James Harden less freedom, which is probably maybe his concerns about playing in Houston, is that he won't get to play his style of basketball. Maybe why he wants to go to Brooklyn, because that's where Mike D'Antoni is right now. But I think that this can actually benefit Harden, because it puts his teammates in a better position. And I think this style of basketball that Silas did, look, last year he was engineering the most efficient offense in NBA history. I mean, so there's something, and with the leading scorer in the NBA the last 3 seasons, you would think that's a good pairing. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what James thinks exactly, but you would think that's a good pairing. I'm excited to see if James buys in what these two can do, because I think it can be really special.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting watching how this kind of plays out, because I think everybody, like, regardless if you're a basketball player or you're going to a new job or you have a new boss, like, there's always a little bit of apprehension. You're not sure how it's going to work out. You don't know the dynamic yet. So I think everybody should probably give this a few months. Let's see how it works out. Let's see how they kind of figure out what their relationship is, how this offense is going to work, how this team is going to be run, and then we can judge it. Because I think it's too quick to judge right now, because I know, like, even myself a little bit, I've judged from the outside, not knowing everything. And I think fans are really quick to judge. So I really want to see what this team can do. Obviously, I'm not a Rockets fan. I cover the Spurs. I'm a huge Spurs fan, but a Spurs fan my whole life. But I enjoy watching James Harden play basketball. As much as a lot of people say, "Oh, I hate it," he's getting to the line.
Like that were out there.
He's getting to the line, because that's how the rules are made. That's how the refs are calling the game. So if you want to be mad at someone, be mad at the rule makers, be mad at the refs, because I think he's incredibly entertaining. And I enjoyed the 2 matchups we had with the Rockets last year, where each team held a 20-point lead, yet each team was able to blow that lead, and the other one ended up winning it late.
We want that one back.
I'm sure. I know.
In San Antonio, we want that back. That shot, that dunk counted, and everyone knows it.
I know. I hear
dunk
people
counted. Everyone knows it, and that changed the whole game.
Yeah, I hear
people, overtime. That game wouldn't have gone overtime if that shot counted.
Yeah, I hear you saying that, and I'm ready to say that if we look at when we were going into halftime, they threw the ball back to Russell Westbrook. That was a backcourt violation, and then it ended up being a lob and another 2 points. So I think everything kind of evened itself out, even though I think the second one rather with Harden was a little bit more, had more momentum to it, right? It like kind of took the air out of the Rockets a little bit, but in the end, I think the Spurs missed the playoffs and the Rockets made the playoffs. So,
yeah,
not a big deal for the Spurs. Like, it didn't matter that much. The Spurs were bad. I hate to say it, but the Spurs were pretty bad last year. We're looking to be better this year. But let's talk about another moment before we kind of wrap things up. Let's talk about another moment between the Spurs and Rockets that was not necessarily controversial, but it definitely, makes the rivalry even better. Today is the 16th anniversary of T-Mac dropping, I think, 13 points in 33 seconds. What do you remember from that?
That is when I became a Rockets fan. That moment is the first real moment I remember as a kid and being enamored by the Rocket. Like, the fact that he was able to do that. And I don't think I appreciated it as much then than I do now, because now I understand how bizarre and improbable that moment is, and honestly almost impossible.
Yeah.
Given that a team like the Spurs, that, championship team Spurs, was so good at defense, was able, that McGrady was able to do that against those Spurs. And, the McGrady era in Houston is beloved, but it's also looked at as kind of a lot of missed opportunities.
Sure.
But that moment is honestly what defines Tracy McGrady's, Houston career, is that moment. And that was honestly, part of the first, 5 or so, that 2000s decade is mostly remembered by Tracy McGrady. And I'll be honest, after the championships, probably the third most important, most exciting moment in franchise history. It's pretty high up there. Maybe the Ralph Sampson buzzer beater in '86, but at least from what I remember, it's 16 years old today, which also makes me feel, very old. I know I don't look it, but that does make me feel old. But always something to look back on. And, I pull up those highlights probably once a year at least, just to be enamored by that excellence. And yeah, that's what has cemented T-Mac's legacy in Houston.
Yeah. And you know what? When I was little, I was 8 when this happened. I was 8 when that happened. I was a huge Spurs fan. Like, I started becoming a Spurs fan when I was little because my parents were Spurs fans. So we were always watching games. And I grew up with, a 99 championship, 2003, 2005. And so by the time this happened, I was like full-fledged Spurs fan. I was all out. I was only 8. And I remember him going off like this. And while I was like really impressed about it, I was 8. So I was really mad. I ended up kicking the TV stand. I got sent to my room. It was a whole crying ordeal. And that was probably like my worst moment, like ugliest moment as a Spurs fan. But it's something I kind of think back on fondly because it was just so incredible. And I know SB Nation did like a video on it, and I watched it, and I remember thinking about how like impressive. And I knew it was impressive in the moment, but going back and reflecting on it and looking at the history of it, like you said, like the Spurs were one of the top defenses in the league. T-Mac wasn't necessarily like at that Orlando level of score he was at, but he was still like an elite player. It's definitely something I'll always kind of have mixed feelings about, but it's an awesome moment for sure. And as we wrap up here, I want to ask you about your power rankings for the Southwest Division. So for me, it's going to look something like the Mavericks at the top. Then I got the Rockets number 2. I got Pelicans 3, Grizzlies 4. And as much as it pains me to say it, I got the Spurs at the bottom. What do yours look like?
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll go from bottom to top here.
Sure, go for it.
I hate to say it. I have the Spurs number 5. Not that they're, bad, but they're in the Western Conference, and the West this year, there's 10 or 11 teams that have playoff aspirations and 4 teams that don't. And the Spurs, I feel like, are one of those 4 teams. But I'm excited about what the Spurs had this year. I think Trey Jones is real exciting. I think Devin Vassell could be a solid. I think he can play a lot, and I think he's a great fit for what the Spurs have going. And then 4 is probably Memphis. Them and New Orleans are pretty much the same. Can I tie them for 3rd at this point?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
I'll probably list the Grizzlies slightly ahead of New Orleans because I feel like New Orleans, a lot of their success hinges on Zion's health. Yeah. So I'll put them number 4, and then 3, the Grizzlies, and then 2, I'll go with, I feel like everyone sees you probably have you have the Rockets number 2 and the Mavericks number 1, just because the Mavericks have Luka, and Luka's trending up and James Harden's trending down. I still think with this roster, the Rockets have a chance to be in the top 4, especially if James Harden's locked in. In terms of the Mavericks, they're a smidge under the Rockets right now. To me, I think that, and people have been putting the Rockets closer to the bottom of the West playoffs just because they see all that's happened. But I think that all of the changes they've made ultimately result in a net positive for the Rockets. I like Christian Wood. That's a huge signing that not a lot of people are looking at as something that's going to change the team, because Christian Wood is going to give them a totally different identity, totally different. He's totally unique compared to any big that James Harden's ever played with. Yeah. So there's that. I like what John Wall can do. I know that's, a negative compared to what Russ left with, but I like the fit better. Demarcus Cousins makes the team deeper. I like, Sterling Brown makes the team deeper too. I think that they have the more potential to be a top 4 team than the Mavericks. So that's why I'll go Rockets 1 by a hair, and then Dallas number 2.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to kind of like throw them 1 or 2. I think it's a little bit of a toss-up there. The only reason I have the Mavericks 1 right now is because, yes, I'm very high on Luka, but I also think if Porzingis is able to stay healthy, plus they have added pieces to their roster to me that really shore up their biggest deficiency, which is defense. They were a pretty awful defensive team last year. They're going to be better, I believe, this year. So I like that. And then with the Rockets, I think they didn't really get significantly worse. I think the Robert Covington move was, for me, at least to me, that's a pretty big loss. I think he's very valuable. But I still think you're right. If the Rockets are able to see a Harden that buys into this and it ends up working out, I think they can be better than the Mavericks. But just for that reason, I don't really have questions about like any sort of chemistry, any sort of disgruntled superstar. That's the only reason I would put Mavericks number one right now. But I think it really is a toss-up. But before I let you go, I want to get your thoughts. Any other thoughts you have about the Rockets or Spurs, or if you don't have any other thoughts, let people know where they can, find you on social media, anything you've worked on, any, podcasts, just plug anything you want.
Yeah. I am prepared for anything and everything this season. I can really see this go in a lot of different directions. I can see the Rockets, hopefully, towards the top of the West, 3 or 4, as a team that is just that can give the Lakers and Clippers a really good run for their money. I think that's their absolute ceiling, and I think their floor could also be missing the playoffs just because of with the uncertainties of Wall's health, with Cousins' health, and with James Harden and his commitment level in question. And they could be anywhere in between as well. What makes the Rockets so exciting to watch and to cover is you really are given something new every year. The team in each of the last 3 years has undergone a significant change in the team before. So we're really seeing a brand new Rockets team this year. So I'm excited for that and to cover it for the Dream Shake. So you can follow the Dream Shake at Dream Shake SBN on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Brener, and you can check out Harden My Take, our podcast. The name might change during the season. We were thinking about naming it if Harden leaves to like talking to a wall or something like that. But name pending. Still, you can check out Harden My Take on thedreamshake.com.
Awesome. We'll definitely check that out, Spurs fans. And thank you for joining me here. I really appreciate you taking time. There's always a little bit of tension between Rockets and Spurs fans, but it's nice to have somebody come in here and be friendly, and we can talk about the Spurs, talk about the Rockets. And, I just am so happy for this new season to start because it is the shortest offseason ever. We're I think less than 2 weeks away from the season starting. So I couldn't be more excited for this season to start. One last question. I got one last question for you before I let you go. What's the one thing you're most excited to see in Houston this season?
Ben McLemore going off. I love Ben McLemore. I should, if there is no Ben McLemore fan club, I'm starting and I'm president. That dude brought everything last year, had the best year of his career, and I really like his prospects of having another great year in Houston.
Y'all heard it here first. Ben McLemore is going to have a breakout season with the Rockets next year. But in all seriousness, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you, Spurs fans, for tuning in. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button if you want to know when the next video is dropping. And leave me a comment. What did I do well? What can I improve on? What do you want to see on this channel? But until next time, guys, take care.